So I'm on the LG stand with Neil, and Neil, there's lots of things happening in terms of picture technology, calibration and so on. We've already seen the video from Tyler talking about the calibration features and also talking about an award you won.
Yes, that was great to be recognised formally by Hollywood and for the work that we've done with Portrait. It was a joint award, but we've been saying for many years that we work closely with Hollywood, and as you probably know, it's difficult to get them to allow you to say that we were used on this film or that film or this TV show, but this legitimizes what we've been saying, and since it's been my work, I feel personally very grateful to have had that.
Well, congratulations. As you know, the AV Forums audience are very much behind as the creator intended, so it's nice to see manufacturers taking it seriously. So in terms of the C10 and upwards this year, Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor, what does that bring to the TVs?
So, well, there are a lot of the AI enhancements are the big change, I would say. From a picture quality perspective, we have the auto genre recognition, and we also are supporting Filmmaker Mode with auto switching approach. That can be via an HDMI signal or via a streaming partner. We give them an API so that their application can automatically switch the TV into Filmmaker Mode. Of course, the reason for that is we want to drive awareness for these modes that preserve the creative intent. We've always had modes that did that, but sometimes the out-of-box experience is usually not in that mode, and the store mode is not like that. And so this encourages users to take a look, see how you like the mode that preserves the creative intent.
And with Filmmaker Mode, you don't have the button on the remote control, you can get through the menus and so on.
Yeah, you can get through the menus. We've selected, rather than do the button on the remote, we're doing the auto switching approach. But as you say, it is a normal picture mode that you could select, just as you could in the past. And even if you turn the auto switching functionality, you can enable and disable that as well after you've made your initial decision.
So it's not going to be forced on people. People, they'd still have a choice to make.
No, absolutely not. Yes, they can make a choice. So you can select yes, I'd like to see it if you receive a pop-up, and then later change your mind if you don't like it, or if you never receive a pop-up for whatever reason, then you can manually select it too.
I guess for most enthusiasts, they'll already have it in ISF dark mode and switched smoothing and true motion and everything else off. This is more for consumers who are maybe don't feel confident enough to go in the menus and switch stuff off.
Well, that's the initiative behind the auto switching or the hotkey button press. There are some subtle differences between the ISF, even the ISF dark mode. ISF dark still is brighter than 100 nits, and in Hollywood at least, SDR means 100 nits peak. That's how they create the content, and any deviation from that, they would say, is not preserving the creative intent.
It's an interesting point, because I have been reading online recently from cinematographers working in the industry as well as colorists and so on, saying that they think it should rise to 200 nits in terms of SDR nit value. What would you say to that?
Those discussions, I think they're not specifically saying that the HDR grading should rise to 200. I think the discussions have been more around if you want to put an SDR signal into an HDR container, or you're a program operator and you're running some content is HDR and some is SDR, how do you handle that, and how do you make it so that the users don't suddenly see a darker picture when they were used to seeing something brighter? And how do I feel about it? I think I wouldn't say that there's any conclusion that's been made by creatives, but at the same time, users are viewing SDR content typically at a slightly brighter, around 200 nits. That's certainly what our cinema mode is and has been for many years. So consumers are used to seeing SDR brighter than it was originally created, and this is a discussion that talks about that.
And then you have Dolby Vision IQ,
yes,
which is changing the brightness on the ambience in the room, the light levels in the room. I guess because it's coming from Dolby, there is the creator intent angle being applied to that.
So that's true. Dolby has ways that creatives can look at the different luminance levels of a display, and now the different luminance levels of an ambient condition, and do what they call trim passes to make adjustments so that things get rendered correctly. Dolby's implementation of that ambient correction is actually something that we had last year before Dolby IQ was officially launched. We also have a similar function in our HDR10, also launched last year. For HDR10, that's LG's implementation and algorithms, and for Dolby, it's theirs.
And Filmmaker Mode, some manufacturers are also using the light sensor with that. Are you doing that with Filmmaker Mode?
Yeah, we're not doing that for this year. The main reason for that is we already have picture modes which preserve the creative intent and have ambient light adaptation, such as our Cinema Home mode in HDR10, and all of the picture modes in SDR can be set to do ambient light adaptation as well. So if you wanted a brighter version of Filmmaker Mode, then the Cinema Mode would be the one that you would select.
I'm going to put you on the spot, and sorry for doing this to you, Neil, but one of the questions that keeps coming up about the LG TVs, they're fantastic. They have every flavour of HDR apart from HDR10 Plus. Why is that?
So HDR10 Plus is what I know of it, and since we are not members of any organisation that represents HDR10 Plus, I know that only from specifications and what's been in the press and talking to content producers. It's different from Dolby Vision in that it typically doesn't have the trim passes that Dolby would have. What I mean by that is with HDR10 Plus you would create an HDR grade, and then information about that content ends up being created by analyzing this HDR content. And the purpose of that is because lower performance TVs or TVs with less ability to analyze that content, they need those cues to help them make decisions on how they're going to do their tone mapping. Dolby Vision does things a different way, where you create your HDR grade and an automatically derived SDR and other HDR levels of grade are created, but then the colorist goes back in and says, well, that was close, but let me make these adjustments here, and maybe for some scenes he doesn't need to make any adjustments, but all of that data ends up going to the TV. For HDR10 in our TVs, we've for several years now, even from our lowest end products to our highest end products, we've supported our own dynamic tone mapping, which is based on very similar image analysis to what HDR10 Plus would have done offline. We're doing that in real time, even in our lowest end TVs. So the need for HDR10 Plus for us doesn't seem to be there.
Okay, so let's move on to calibration, which I know is your baby. You really like this, and you're still doing this at the hardware level, which makes LG unique, that you actually go into the hardware level when you're making changes to the LUTs and so on. So maybe you can take people through what's new this year in terms of AutoCal and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the Alpha 9 Gen 3 still has the same 33 cube 3D LUT that we had in the Alpha 9 Gen 1 and 2, and the same 1D LUT, which is 15-bit precision, 1024 points for adjusting your grayscale and gamma. So that part is unchanged. The big change that we've made for this year is the ability to use the integrated integrated test pattern generator, where previously it was halfway through the video pipeline that still allows you to do an accurate calibration, but it didn't allow you to validate your HDR calibration. And as Tyler probably alluded to, that people like to share the results of their calibration. So you could still get a good calibration using the internal pattern generator before, but you could never share your result. And so now we moved that pattern generator to right at the HDMI input, and so it is in theory a better representation of what an HDMI input would give you, but also allows you to validate HDR. There's a couple of other things we added. One is the ability to adjust the white balance after you've done your 1D lookup table, your grayscale and gamma adjustment. And this is because we know that with wide color gamut displays, particularly if you're trying to match two different technologies, as is very often done in Hollywood, and even the auto calibration is something that came out of our work with Hollywood. If you're trying to match two different displays, they may measure the same, but they may look different. And so now, after you've done your calibration, you can do a quick adjustment and shift the white point if you felt that it visually looked too green or too pink, for example, whilst maintaining that accurate gamma response that you'd already done.
And you mentioned Hollywood. There's some new features in there that they can access because there are issues with using SDI to and so on?
Yeah, so we added a feature which we're calling HDMI override. The idea behind that is consumer devices are very good at signaling and setting up your TV. They know if it's a Blu-ray player, for example, or a set-top box. The display will know, is this an HDR or an SDR signal, because that signaling is coming over the HDMI cable. Hollywood typically uses SDI, which doesn't have any signaling like that, and so you have to manually configure the display. And so we're calling it HDMI override, but it's basically manual configuration of, is the content BT 2020, 709, P3, and is the EOTF, gamma, PQ, HLG, and then going beyond that, because we know we're not unique in having a kind of HDR on-off switch, we also added the ability to adjust the mastering display peak and the max CLL, max full values to actually adjust the tone mapping. And this works in concert with the HDR tone mapping adjustments that we have, where you can change the shape of the tone curve and adjust the tone curves to match the panel peak that we introduced last year, and I know you talked with Tyler about earlier. And
another unique feature with that is, I suppose, you can switch your tone mapping off completely and have it hard clip.
Yes, you can, yes, because if you were to set your max CLL or mastering display peak at or less than your measured panel peak, then that's exactly what you'll get, a PQ hard clip.
And anything else that our members need to know about the new range of OLED TVs?
Gaming features, of course we have G-Sync. This year for 2020 we're able to do 4K resolution between 40 and 120. The 2019 TVs, due to HDMI limitations, we were only able to do between 40 and 60 at 4K. We could do 40 to 120 hertz at 1440p, but only with HDMI 2.1. And this year we've been able to allow 4K 120 420 8-bit over HDMI 2, which opens up the possibility of 4K 120 G-Sync with NVIDIA's current generation of graphics cards. It's a limitation that will go away once NVIDIA launches HDMI 2.1 cards, but we're pleased to be able to have added that. The other thing is we have a mode called HGIG, or HDR Gaming Interest Group, which is again obviously a gaming feature. It's in our game mode, game HDR mode, and it is a single option that gives you a PQ hard clip. And the purpose of this is, typically our HDR modes will be using dynamic tone mapping, but games often have a screen where you adjust where your peak luminance is, like a checkerboard or a circle with another circle inside. And what they're looking for is the clipping point of your display. If you've got dynamic tone mapping, that clipping point keeps moving as you make your adjustments. And this allows you to set the PQ hard clip, and then your slider in your game will more accurately control how the game's going to do its tone mapping to match your screen.
And it's one of the things I think that gets overlooked when it comes to OLED, and I suppose it comes down to the whole argument about image retention and so on, that using an OLED monitor as a gaming monitor seems to pass some people by, and they're really missing out by doing that.
Absolutely. We over the last couple of years we've been driving down the input lag of our displays, and now we're at such a low point that we are equal, or in most cases, not just many cases, but most cases, better than dedicated gaming monitors. So it's no longer just a good TV for gaming, it's the ultimate gaming monitor.
And at 48 inches, which you just so happen to be standing next to, it makes even more sense.
Absolutely. It's almost bridging that gap even more so. G-Sync is a PC technology on a TV. 48 inch it's not quite a traditional monitor size, but monitors go up to maybe 32, 34 inches. Previously there was this kind of big gap if you wanted to do gaming, with 55 being the smallest OLED size, and now 48 bridges that gap.
And one question I wanted to ask you, which is, it's speculation has been going around on our forums and so on, and I've never had an answer for it to reply to these threads, but when it comes to the panels for the different model numbers, are they all the same, or are the panels graded as in terms of the level of TV?
No, they are all the same. There's no grading that takes place based on the model type. Of course, you can probably see this being a C10 model. The panel is bonded to a sheet of metal. In the case of an E last year, they were bonded to pieces of glass. So it's not like they're interchangeable, but the specifications and performance are all identical.
So you're not grading them on performance and putting lower grade into the lower model numbers?
No, that's not what's happening.
Neil, it's fascinating as always speaking to you. I want one of these badges as well that has your name on it.
Yeah.
Have a really good CES, and I'm looking forward to seeing the TVs this year.
Yeah, thanks very much, Phil.